The turnip winter. That doesn't sound good. That's where we left off in 1916, 1917. The German nation is starving. Civilians are literally starving. And you can see this with a little data right here on the screen of why food is leaving the mouths of civilians and it's feeding the army. In each week, this is each week, the whole German army needs 60 million pounds of bread, 17 million pounds of meat, and 131 million pounds of potatoes. All of each week, all of which is not going to civilians but to the German army. So we really see these results on the civilian population. They're barely eating, and thus they're malnourished, which means they're more susceptible to disease. So we're going to get, well, I don't know how many, but over 1 million civilians who died. But we enter an interesting new time, which is 1917, and a lot goes on. Basically, we're still not closer to the end of this war at this time. If you're sitting in 1917, you're thinking maybe in the 1920s this war ends, but things begin to change in 1917. Um, and it begins early on. It's one of those interesting things. The first two things right here that Churchill talked about: what ifs, what ifs. The unrestricted submarine warfare is going to be enacted in very early February of 1917. The Russian Revolution begins on our calendar in March of 1917, and then the Russians will call it the February Revolution. Um, so Churchill said, think about this. If they waited 2 months on unrestricted submarine warfare, then the Russian Revolution would have happened, and the German army wouldn't have done it. And if they don't do it, then the U.S. doesn't get involved. Conversely, if the Russian Revolution happens earlier, all right, so this swing, if they switch in time frame, USW in the Russian Revolution, the U.S. doesn't enter, and Germany probably wins the war because the Russians pull out, the Germans can throw all their weight over on the West, and the Allies just don't have the manpower to meet the Germans. So think about that for a second. 2 months, maybe a month, if they would have waited on this, but they don't. In early February 1917, um, at the pushing of the new German commanders who are basically ruling Russia, it's a military dictator, ruling Germany, it's a military dictatorship. In 1917, Hindenburg and Ludendorff, remember from Tannenberg fame, they have replaced Falkenhayn, and basically they convince the Kaiser to unleash unrestricted submarine warfare. And the idea is this: they know this. They believe if they just start destroying merchant ships left and right, then what's going to happen is the Brits will be starved out of this war and will leave, and that'll leave the Frenchies alone. But they know this is going to bring the U.S. into the war, so they believe they can starve out Britain before the U.S. gets enough troops over. And they believe that they can do this. So in February, they begin to do unrestricted submarine warfare. And it is extremely successful. In 20 days of USW, the Germans sunk 128 merchant ships, 40 of which were neutral. In April, in the month of April alone, they sunk 423. U.S. ships begin not to leave U.S. ports. Perishables are rotting. And by late May, of course, Woodrow Wilson has had enough. And the U.S. declares war April 2nd, 1917. Now, what is interesting about this is the idea, what kind of saves Britain wasn't a military idea, but a civilian one. David Lloyd George, the prime minister, comes along and basically says we need to do a convoy system. Now, what was the convoy system? It says, instead of these ships going individually, we're going to put them into a big pack of like 100 merchant ships that carry the merchandise, surrounded by battleships. And the military was like, oh, you can't do that. They're going to be a huge target. And the civilians were like, no, 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 listen. Yeah, but that may be the case, but it's a big ocean. And if we get a convoy across, that's 100 ships across instead of one ship across. And so they begin to do this. So what happens is these submarines may destroy one or two merchant ships in the convoy, but the U-boat's destroyed because they're going to see where it is when it comes out of the water, and the battleships, which are faster than the subs, will go over there, drop depth charges, and destroy it. So basically, it is a suicide attack by a submarine, a U-boat, if you do this. And the convoy system works. Now, this is going to influence Churchill a lot, that sometimes these generals don't have the best ideas, because this is a civilian answer to a bad problem. While this is all happening, the Russians stage a major revolutions. There are actually two revolutions in 1917. You will watch a 2-day podcast from the AP Central on this. So I will leave that for Wednesday and Thursday with a little bit of note taking along with it. So basically, this is going to lead to the rise of Lenin, and the Russians will be out of the war. We know the U.S. enters the war in April of 1917, but it'll be kind of in the fall when they start getting in like 100,000 or 500,000 troops a month. It takes a little while to get going. And this brings us to another part. And this is, of course, the infamous Hindenburg Line right here. This is what the movie 1917 is about. What Hindenburg decides to do is move his line from here, of course, to here. He reduces the line. Now, that means less troops are needed on this line. He can pack them closer together. And so what he does is, in this whole area right here, it becomes a no man. A wasteland is a better answer. Whole villages are torn down. There are 1 million German troops tearing down villages, tearing up roads, poisoning wells, putting booby traps in basements. It's a literal wasteland. And he begins to create almost 8,000 yards. Imagine that. 8,000 yards, 80 football fields of reinforced lines. The first line, few troops. The second line is a little bit more troops. And so what happens is, if you're an attacking army and you cross this area, you're getting sporadic fire, and as you move, this gets more and more, almost like a rubber band being pulled back and getting tightened. So as you get back, as you attack, if you're the Frenchies attacking, the Germans are pulling back, pulling you deeper and deeper, and you're getting weaker. So imagine marching 12 miles and being shot at, while the German line's getting stronger and stronger, like an elastic band, and then boom, here comes the massive German counterattack. And you're done. And you're done. And this is kind of what we see a little bit in 1917. So this is this wasteland, and as the Frenchies attack, the German line pulls back and gets stronger and stronger like a rubber band, and then snaps back. And it's not necessarily lines, it's like foxholes everywhere, right? Easier for the Germans to retreat, but you're taking casualties if you're the Frenchies. So they get a new French commander. Joffre has moved up the line and moved out, and they get a guy by the name of Nivelle. And Nivelle says this: I'm going to do an attack. And in 48 hours, if it's not successful, you can fire me. And so he loads up all these troops, and they decide to, guess where they attack? They decide to attack right in the Hindenburg line. And the Germans know this, so they reinforce this. So in snow, this attack opens up. And within 48 hours, it's a complete disaster. Over 150,000 French casualties and 48,000. It's a complete disaster. And it's from here, when they finally pull back, all right? After just a couple days and this complete failure, that you begin to see something that we really didn't learn about until the 70s, 1970s. And that, of course, is the French mutinies. Several divisions begin to say they're not going to go on the attack anymore. And they're not. They're tired of just these wasteless attacks and being destroyed by the Germans. And so Nivelle is fired. He's replaced by Petain, the hero of Verdun. And basically, I mean, these are massive mutinies infecting dozens and dozens of divisions. And so the new French commander Petain says, "We're not going to we're not going to attack. We're going to go on the defensive." All right, to calm people down, and it does calm down a lot of divisions. But this is terrible, and they kept this secret. They kept this secret because if the Americans would have heard about it, we're not going to go fight for a country that doesn't want to fight for itself, right? So this is very kept hush hush, and I think it was even kept hush hush from the British. So you have this going on. In July of 1917, the Russians attack again in cloth hats, which amazes me, and they're pretty much destroyed. The Russian army disintegrates in July of 1917. There is some good news in the Middle East. There's a gentleman by the name of Lawrence of Arabia. You should Google what he looks like. He foments rebellion amongst the Arabs against the Ottoman rule. He speaks fluent Arabic. He dresses in Arab garb, and he leads them. And this is when you get the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, basically. Jerusalem falls. And we'll talk about him with the Treaty of Versailles because he's promising a lot of self-determination in the Middle East, which of course they do not get in the Middle East. You still are going to get European control after World War One. But Jerusalem falls in November. The Austrians knock the Italians out of the war in November. All right, so you have that going on. In 1917, guys, it ends. You do get a massive attack by tanks at the end of the war. You get this infamous battle of Passchendaele in the north by the British, and the British take horrendous casualties. And it's known for an immense amount of mud, just mud, 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 mud. But the main thing in 1917, of course, is the U.S. enters the war, and of course you have the Russian Revolution. And you will start watching a little podcast from the AP Central on the next 2 days. It's pretty good. It's okay. It might be a little boring at times, but it's not as exciting as mine. I just don't have really enough time to put it together. It's kind of already been put together. It's pretty thorough. So you're going to be watching that over the next couple days. So hopefully you enjoy 1917. So remember, at the end of 1917, if you're to take a survey on December 31st, 1917, of who's going to win this war, nobody has a clue. Nobody has a clue. By 1943, we know we're going to win World War II. It's just a matter of time. In the beginning of 1918, which is when we'll start probably, I don't know when we'll start that. Nobody knows. But it will end in 1918, and it's because of the arrival of the Americans, and it's because of the precarious situation that the German nation is in, especially with starvation and things like that. All right, guys, that is 1917.